Welcome to the Growth Plus Exit podcast, where owners of privately held middle market companies talk about founding, scaling, and exiting their businesses successfully. Learn how to maximize and monetize your business on your own terms. Let's get started.
Hello, I'm Heather Bennett, your host for the Growth Plus Exit podcast, featuring middle market business owners and experts talking about founding, growing, and exiting their businesses on their own terms. Past guests include Tom Parker, CEO of Aligned, Philip D'Souza, founder of Aurora and HotLunch.com, and Anissa Muthana, CEO of Pioneer Service and M&M Quality Grinding. This episode is brought to you by Newport LLC, a team of seasoned C-suite executives helping CEOs of privately held companies grow, de-risk, and exit their businesses successfully. Newport LLC is a winner of the prestigious Inc. magazine Power Partner Award, recognizing elite B2B companies. To see a list of winners, go to inc.com/Power Partner Awards. To learn more about Newport, please visit us at our website, newportllc.com, or find us on LinkedIn. Before I introduce today's guest, I would like to thank Rob Johanneman for introducing us. So let me tell you about today's guest. Davis Anderson is a Chicago-based author and expert in manufacturing, succession planning, specializing in guiding family-owned companies towards sustainable growth. As the author of Sustaining a Family Jewel, he helps business owners navigate generational transitions, avoid operational pitfalls, and preserve their legacy. He brings decades of experience to the table, including a role as the former CEO of Chicago Extruded Metals, with a unique exit story for his family business that we'll talk about later. And currently, he is the founder of the Manufacturing Collective. Davis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be here.
Excellent. So let's get right into it. How did you get started in manufacturing?
Well, I am the third generation of a manufacturing family. My grandfather started the company you mentioned, Chicago Extruded Metals Company. Excuse me. And he was a great man, and my father succeeded him. And one of the things that I say in my book is that because the company went from my grandfather to my father and then subsequently to me, I just sort of assumed that generational succession happened. And as I have very much learned since then, it does not just happen. It has to be thoughtfully believed in, committed to, and planned for. And but from that background, I have a deep love of manufacturing. I think it is essential. It has always astounded me when people say that manufacturing is passé and we don't need it anymore. And you look around and everything that everybody touches every day is manufactured, and including the things that we carry around and put on our ears all day or we look at all day. And manufacturing is essential to our country. The supply chain is very important, and I believe that family-owned manufacturing companies are the backbone of our manufacturing supply chain, and they need to be sustained.
Absolutely. I do agree with you on that. So tell me about the experience of working in a family-owned business. Like you said, the generational succession happened. But what was that like?
Well, again, I talk a lot about this in the book. I talk about things I think we did very well in terms of succession, and I talk about things we did not do terribly well. I think very important is that you bring your family members into the discussion about the company. And my father was a member of the greatest generation. They are humble, um, wonderful people, but he didn't talk a lot about what he did. And on the other hand, I would go on Saturday mornings, we'd go to the office. I became very familiar with the shop floor. When I was in college, I worked summers on the shop floor, got to know a lot of the people, learned what real work is all about. I also learned that if I showed up 5 minutes late, my pay would be docked 15 minutes, which incensed me. I couldn't understand that being on time was actually important. But those are all things that I learned, and but because we did not talk as much about sort of how this process would work, I think it's very important. But before you go into family business, that you work somewhere else. And I did apply. Most importantly, I applied to something called the General Electric Management Training Program, which would have been better for me probably than any business school could have been. And unfortunately, I was not accepted. And I think part of the reason was that maybe I just exuded the notion that I was just going to go work for the family company. And that's what I ended up doing. And I would hugely recommend that people in my position at that time and really must work somewhere else. You get an idea of different cultures. Most importantly, your accomplishments are because of what you're doing, not because of who you are. And that engenders respect from others, but most importantly, it engenders confidence and respect for yourself, which I think is incredible. You've got to believe in yourself, and you don't necessarily get that by directly going into the family situation. Now, on the other hand, I had tremendous opportunities. I became a general manager of one of our divisions relatively early. I was very much attuned and part of all kinds of planning that went on and strategic discussions. I also learned that my father and I were very different. His expectations and sort of his strategic view was different than mine. And that became apparent as time went on and when I transitioned into the leadership role.
And that's very common. I've heard that from other multi-generational businesses, that it is beneficial for that second or third generation or fourth generation to go work somewhere else. You know, for all the points you said, learning culture, different ways of approaching business strategy, different ways of working. And there's no assumptions when you go in to a new business and start learning it. You can't assume, well, that's what we always did. So
Right.
that helps you, I think through the strategy better. So what do you wish you would have known when you entered? So tell me about the process of moving into the role of CEO of Chicago Extruded Metals. And, you know, they had moved you up the company and given you a chance to get to know it. But what do you wish you had known when you entered that role?
Well, I think very importantly, one of the things I lost track of because my father very smartly and terrifically, we consolidated from over 100 shareholders to eventually one shareholder, which was I was the sole shareholder. And I lost track of this being a family company. This was not my company. This was a family company. I heard one of your former podcast individuals, Anessa, I think I pronounced her name correctly, and she had that sense very clearly in her mind that her path to the role she had led through her family. And I lost track of that. And what that meant is that my values, my aspirations got bigger than if I had maintained the roots back to our family legacy. And I think part of that goes to the fact that my father and I did not, we kind of assumed what might happen, but we didn't really talk a lot about it. And I spend much time in the book saying how important those discussions are, that when succession planning must start very early. I was reading something recently about it was a consulting firm that works with family companies, and they talked about this. One client said that his biggest regret was that he did not start succession planning earlier. And this particular firm, which is not yours, this particular firm said that they thought you should start 5 or 10 years before a possible transition. And in my mind, that's too late. You really start thinking about it when the children are born. And so I wish that discussion of family had taken place more often in our situation. And I describe in the book my hiring of somebody as the chief operating officer, and I gave him way too much authority and responsibility. And I would honestly admit that maybe some of that had to do with the fact that I had not gained as much confidence in myself by, as we said, working somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are lots of things I could regret. I applied very early on. Excuse me. I applied very early on to the executive program at the University of Chicago. Excuse me. And a great guy who had run the program, and that, as you may know, was really sort of the first executive type program in the country. And this guy, Walter Fackler, was the director. And I was 27 years old, and he said, "Davis, we'd love to have you come in, but we think you're too young." And so I said, "Fine." He said, "Our average age is sort of 33 to 35. And 2 years later, I got married, and the thought of business school was no longer front and center. And I don't think business school is necessary in the sense of you're being taught often by people who've never been in business. But I think the exposure that you get to a whole bunch of people, including your classmates, and again, I bring up the confidence that you get by being around a bunch of smart people, and the fact that you're being pushed by smart people. I think that is very essential. So I do not have 3 letters after my name for an MBA, but I think that would have been helpful. I mentioned working elsewhere, um, but I loved our people. I loved being on the shop floor. I loved our customers. I loved going, walking through customer plants. We always made a point of talking to the operators of machines that used our product, because we'd learn a lot more from them than from the buyers with whom we were dealing. But we had great customers. The whole experience was terrific, and that drives my whole feeling of passion for manufacturing and passion for family companies.
I would definitely agree with that. I think there is learning business has to come from three different directions. Academics certainly help because it gives you the foundation and the basis, but also learning from the people to your left and your right who have had different experiences, have had been in different industries, had different roles. That's certainly important. And then there really is nothing comparable to, like you said, being on the shop floor. So being in real life, in the situations, seeing how operations work, there's no substitute for that at all. I definitely agree that those are the three ways to learn a business the best and to really gain those core skills. So let's talk about the exit. What happened with the company?
Well, I would say the biggest mistake I made was when I promoted our very good operations manager to the role of general manager. So he was a great operations manager, and he turned out not to be a very good general manager. So I hired somebody, I mentioned earlier, chief operating officer, who had done work with us. I really liked the guy. He had a great attitude. I thought he believed in the same ideas that I believed in. And I gave him a lot of responsibility and authority. And I took my eye off the ball. One of the things that we had done, we had a great culture. And we were unionized. We were unionized back in the 1930s, and which is when most, particularly heavy manufacturing companies, either they were forced into it or you did it because unionization was very prevalent at the time. And we had our ups and downs over the years, and strikes and conflict and whatever. But during my years, we had a great relationship, and we had a culture that was very much people oriented. We at an early point in my career running the company, we consolidated facilities, and I took the office from a separate building and put it into a corner of our main manufacturing building. Everybody walked through the same doors. There were no assigned parking spaces. So even if you didn't want to go see people who worked on the shop floor, you had to walk through the same door, and you rubbed elbows with them anyway. We had an open office plan, and there's a lot of feeling on both sides of that discussion, whether an office is better than an open office plan, but we had an open office plan. So I hired this guy, and I hadn't been to the plant, embarrassingly, in a little while, and I show up, and I see all these cinder blocks and they're building offices and they're doing things. And I'd say, what is going on? And that shows how I had lost touch. And I had given him the responsibility. Well, I describe it in the book, and I won't go through it right now. We had a major mechanical failure that was really precipitated by decisions that he made. And we, at the same time, the international that we worked with merged with another much more confrontational international. And so we had this major mechanical failure for 6 months. We operated at about 50% capacity. And these were decisions this guy made. And we were going like a rocket at that point. And LLCs were not possible in Illinois at that time. And we converted to a subchapter S. And our tax person said, there's no reason to do this if you're not going to make money. I said, make money. We just had one of the best quarters we ever had. This is going to be a great year. Well, that was the last quarter that we made real money. And our culture was destroyed. I promoted this man. I had promoted just before this problem happened. I had promoted him to president. And after we had parted ways, we had a dinner with the wives and the spouses of our management staff. And it was principally the spouses that said, "What were you doing? Why'd you hire that guy? Why did you give him?" So my view of him, which is why my belief that something like 360 performance evaluations are so important. The people below somebody in an organization chart know way more about that person's performance than somebody who's up here. And so that was my biggest mistake. Our union relations were completely destroyed at that point. Very confrontational. All of the good things that we had done in terms of continuous improvement and policies and procedures and quality systems and all kind of dissipated. And fast forward about 7 or 8 years, and we were trying to get people to help us, and I was talking with somebody in New York, and he said, "Davis, you're not going to like me saying this, but you are in a spiral right now. It's going in the wrong direction, and you're never going to get out of it." And so we ended up filing for bankruptcy. So I lost the company. I did bring in the person who bought the company, who was an old-time friend, and he was very supportive. I hired the guy who ended up running the company for many years afterwards. And I was involved. I was non-executive chairman for many years, but I had no ownership, and it was very different. But so my exit as the title of your show, Growth and Exit. Your firm works with people to have, if one is exiting, having a good exit. Not all exits are good, and mine was not. but I learned that you and I were talking before we started recording about failure. I learned a lot as a result. And even at my elderly age, I think that my experience can really help some people not go through what I went through.
Exactly. We're going to talk about the book you wrote that really very much focuses on that learning and paying it forward, sustaining a family jewel. But first, I have to just say, I really admire your recognition of the accountability for which decisions started that process, because it didn't happen overnight. I mean, it took, what, 7, 8 years. But I really admire that you recognize your role, the accountability, the importance of hiring the right person for the right role in management to get things done, the value of the employees and the culture, and how that impacted the situation, but also the changing dynamics of the industry. Being, manufacturing in 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, very different than
Yeah.
later, very different, and not, somewhat from a technology standpoint, but there were a lot of other things going on, and so I appreciate your candor with how that process went. So let's talk about the book you wrote and what led to creating Sustaining a Family Jewel, and what you hope readers will get out of it.
Well, when the pandemic hit us all, there was probably 5% good that came out of that whole experience for all of us, and 95% bad. But one of the things that it did is it forced some of us to kind of think where we were and how we could do some things going forward. One of my daughters suggested I listened to some guy by the name of Stu McLaren, and he's all about membership, online memberships, and so that listening to him and becoming part of some of the things he did, and then I started learning about other people like Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi and Grant Cardone, and I got connected with lots of people and spent thousands of dollars that I didn't have. And everybody said, if you're going to have a product or a service, you're going to do something. A book is nice, but it doesn't, you don't necessarily earn a lot of money from it. And so don't start with a book. And then I have a very good friend who's in Boston, and I was with her, and she said, why don't you write a book? And I said, no, you don't write a book. And I thought more about it. I said, actually, a book would be a great thing to develop content, to have a message, and to be able to spread the message. So I said, yeah, I'll write a book. And I researched and came up with this company called selfpublishing.com. And great coach, Brett, whom I talk with once or twice or more a month, even today, after the book has been published. And so I started the project. They have us develop mind maps. So I developed a mind map on a big Post-it sheet, and the family company was in the middle, and then all these different legs went off. And I showed it to him. I was so proud. And he said, Davis, that's really terrific, but you could actually write 50 books based on what you've got there. So I said, all right. and one of the legs related to succession. And that was my next mind map. I created a mind map with succession in the middle, generational succession and family companies in the middle, and then all the legs that went off it. And that led to the creation of the book. And it was, I actually enjoyed it as we've discussed it. There's a bit of an autobiography in the whole thing. It's a very personal book. I lay my soul pretty open because I feel that's the best way for people to recognize what I've been through and what the kind of experience that I think can benefit people. Then the problem becomes, when I was in manufacturing directly, I really believed in our products. I loved going out and selling them. The problem is with the book and what I was offering to do with the book, all of a sudden I'm selling me. And that I'm not good at. And it's such a different, so I'm writing the book, it's my own personal space and I'm working with it and the ideas are flowing in my mind. But now I've got to go out and actually sell myself and sell my ideas. And so the whole sales and marketing side following writing the book is completely different than anything that I've done before. And they, all of these people, some of whom I just mentioned, they point out that what's important is your message, what you're trying to tell people, and what you're trying to help people with, and help them avoid some of the things that we've been through. And so you're not really selling yourself. You're selling support and help and assistance and advice and a way for people to avoid pain and disruption in their own lives.
Yeah, as an author, I can relate to that. The first half of the work you do is writing and getting the book published. The second half is promoting it ongoing. And that can be a little uncomfortable when you focused writing the book on helping the people it's meant for. So with the book, and you talked about that, specifically about succession, I think one of the hardest parts about succession planning is having those difficult family discussions. Do you have any advice about how to get those family discussions started? And I agree, earlier is better. I actually recommend, as soon as a person enters a leadership role, that's the moment that you have to start succession planning. Not that you're trying to kick them out. Right. Not that they haven't earned that role and that you want to support them, but it's simply being responsible for the company and the employees and the customers. So how do you start those difficult conversations?
You start them early and you deal with uncomfortable subjects on a regular basis. The family dinners, which we had family dinners, but we didn't talk much about the company. And I'm not saying the whole family dinner should be talking about the company, but I think a portion of it, and giving insight into the great opportunity that a family company provides. And so family dinners, I have a quote in the book from Ronald Reagan. He said, I think it was in his farewell address, he said, if you really want to learn about America, sit around the dining table at a family dinner. And but guess what? I don't know that family dinners are much of a thing in today's world. And sadly, if there is a family dinner, everybody's got their own device that they keep referring to and looking at uh, and maybe interacting with. But I do think really being purposeful about discussions and not and becoming comfortable talking about the uncomfortable, because if you wait, it's going to become really uncomfortable, and then you get into sibling rivalries. I mean, I do start the book with a reference to what I thought was an awful show. I could not watch the whole thing, Succession. I only watched 3 or 4 episodes, and I could find none of the people redeeming and none of the messages redeeming. And I start the book when the patriarch tells the son he has presumably anointed as his successor, and he says, "You are an effing idiot." And that then leads to all of the blow-ups and every sibling then thinking that they're the ones who's going to be the one who's going to run it. And then the patriarch says, "You know what, I'm just going to stay around a few more years." But if you wait until the succession is inevitable, it leads to all sorts of terrible issues. And yet, because of that uncomfortable nature of those discussions, they don't happen. In too many places, they don't happen.
I agree. I'm a big supporter of family dinners, and in this day and age, it's difficult. It's difficult. I think, maybe starting small, once a month, no phones on the table. Simple actions like that can make a big difference.
Correct.
You want to do carry out, take out to make it easy on everybody, great. But I also think there's some value in cooking together in the kitchen. So, and even cleaning up afterwards. So the entire process leads to a lot of moments where those open discussions that may be uncomfortable could be a little bit easier. So,
well, and I think the kitchen, obviously, when I was growing up, the dining room was where you ate dinner. Nowadays, the kitchen has become a much more expansive space and a place where people congregate and get together. So in theory, it should be easier to have the discussions. But everybody's running around so fast doing different things. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. Starting small.
That's small.
Yeah, you're not going to, if it hasn't been happening, it's not all of a sudden going to happen every night.
Right. Another book I've found is very helpful is the book Every Family's Business, that I highly recommend for family business owners and their families to read, because it talks about it's basically a story. It's in story form, but it's 2 different business owners discussing one that had gone well and one that had not gone well, and playing off of each other to talk about the different aspects and what are the questions you have to be talking about every year with the family, regardless of whether there's a transition on the horizon or not. So let's talk about where you are right now and your business, the Manufacturers Collective, and your vision for the future of manufacturing.
So the Manufacturers Collective is sort of my umbrella to be able, I mean, I call it an advisory. I don't necessarily like the word consulting. I think consultants can be great, but I view the Manufacturers Collective more as an advisory of somebody who is by your side as you go through and make decisions. And I refer in the book to assets, and assets could be mentors, could be coaches, could be a whole range of things. But these assets, and you only need 2 or 3. They're people you respect deeply, people you trust deeply. Goes both ways. And you're willing to discuss anything with them in order to make your life better. And I'd sort of like the Manufacturers Collective to be something like that, to work with the owners and leaders of family-owned companies. I have learned that there's a great man in Chicago who has developed golf courses around the country and around the world, and all he wanted to do was build a great golf course. He didn't care if anybody ever showed up. And in fact, it's been unbelievably successful, what he's done. But he's one of the few people I know who built it, and they did come. And so any of you listening out there, sign up. I'd love to have a discussion with you and talk about your family jewel and what you can do to sustain that family jewel. The future of manufacturing, I am hugely positive on, and this is one of the 5% that was the benefit of the pandemic, is we learned how important supply chains are. We learned that there are countries around the world where we have outsourced enormous amounts of our production that aren't necessarily that friendly to us when we need them. And that definitely is turning around. There are trillions of dollars literally being invested in our economy today, and a lot of the high profile projects are they're big, whether it's semiconductor plants or the huge amounts of data processing that's going on. But all of that requires the supply chain, and it requires companies like ours and the ones that you deal with to fill out that supply chain. And so I think, and people are beginning to believe that working with your hands is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. Not everybody needs a liberal arts degree to learn something that may not be useful. And so I think there's a big shift going on that, if we allow it to happen, is going to be terrifically useful for manufacturing and for family-owned manufacturing companies and for starting companies, because really every company started in a sense as a family company, even something that ends up huge and becomes very public. So I think there's great. I am extremely bullish if we continue to let it happen and not end up with policies that put us back to where we were. And it's so sad. You go through small towns all over America and you see empty factories. And we've got to, we have to, and we can reverse that. It'll never go back to what it was. I mean,
No.
It's not nostalgia for what was, but it's what can be and the reality of what manufacturing is.
I love that you focused on a couple of the key points of the future of manufacturing. One being, of course, the use of resources. We have so many resources in this country, and like even just the use of commercial real estate. That's certainly during the pandemic came up as a very important topic. How are we using it? How will they be reused or changed use in the future? And then also workforce development. A couple of the people I've interviewed on this podcast, including Matt Vukov, talk a lot of Talentcraft, talk a lot about what the future of the workforce is. And there are so many amazing opportunities that don't require people to go into massive debt for a 4-year school that will be better aligned with their talent, skills, and their ability to find fulfillment and joy in their careers going forward. And really understanding the opportunities. And we certainly, when you talk about the semiconductor and data storage right now, that definitely an area where we need a lot of people to do the work to get that done in order for the needs to be fulfilled, because there's a huge need out there for both of those. So thank you for highlighting all of those. That was great. I do have one last question, but before I ask it, I want to point people to your website at manufacturerscollective.com, and also that they, of course, can reach out to you through LinkedIn. So the final question is, and I know there's so much more we could talk about. The final question is, what hard lesson did you learn while leading these various businesses? Because you didn't stop at your family's business. You end up going on to have amazing leadership roles afterward. What hard lessons did you learn during your leadership role of those businesses that you'd like to help other CEOs avoid?
Well, in watching some of your podcasts, I forget who it was, but one of your guests, you asked the question, how did he come up with partners that he partnered with? And I'll tell one very brief story. I was involved in a restaurant chain that was small, but it was growing and it was successful. It needed cash. We ended up with somebody who was funding the growth. And as soon as he became a 50.0001 owner, he took over, changed it entirely, ended up destroying the company, and it ended up being a disaster. And the guy who started the company and whose idea it was got devastated. And so I think not that someone's necessarily going to have a partner. I described the person I hired who was not the right guy. It's really finding the right people to partner, whether that means in a financial sense or in a management sense, or an outside advisory sense, finding the right people who understand you, believe in what you believe in, and aren't going to compromise what you've done.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I find it interesting, the amount of time, effort, number of people involved in a M&A transaction, in the buying and selling of companies, how much due diligence is put forth in deciding whether to sell a company or not. I find it interesting that there isn't an equal amount of that when it comes to partnership and deciding who to partner with. I've advised a few people on that process, and one of the things I start with is it's okay to walk away. If at any point this doesn't feel right, you don't feel they've got the financial back, whatever it is, it's okay to walk away. And if they enter the relationship with that in mind, or even the discussions of building that partnership, it really de-risks the partnership at the end. and that type of exact situation that you mentioned. So hopefully we'll have more people thinking in that way.
Well, I love this story that Anissa, when she was selling her companies, and something wasn't right, and she said the other people walked away because they were the ones who screwed up. But then that completely changed her life. She saw it as a sign to do things in a better, different way, and ended up growing the company way beyond her dreams, and I mean all kinds of great things.
Yeah, that's such a good story. One of my favorite podcast episodes. I've been talking with Davis Anderson, former CEO of Chicago Extruded Metals, founder of the Manufacturing Collective, and author of Sustaining a Family Jewel, definitely a book that every family business should get their hands on. Davis, thank you so much for sharing your story and experience today.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you for listening to the Growth Plus Exit podcast, sponsored by Newport, a unique national business advisory firm. If you enjoyed this show, be sure to share, like, and subscribe for future episodes.